Okay, good morning everyone. I hope you can hear me. I can see that some people are still jumping in, so that's great. Welcome along to our second Transafe WA webinar this morning with Dr. Nick Mabbott for the month. My name's Anna Stakowitz. I'm Executive Officer of Transafe WA. We're a non-profit road transport industry safety initiative, and we've been operating since 2013. With a focus on events and projects for safety in the road transport industry. Since 2013, Transafe WA has delivered 24 road transport industry safety forums to thousands of industry participants throughout WA. These have provided a forum for the discussion of industry's needs and risks, and also a conduit for industry participants to speak to their regulators and the key decision makers and make some better decisions about safe operations in the industry. Obviously, due to the pandemic this year, we had to change things up a little bit, and we have started this online webinar platform to bring some safety topics to our subscribers and members in this forum. So that's been going really successfully. The other thing that Transafe have started doing more of is developing campaigns to educate the general public to share the road safely with heavy vehicles. This feedback we received regularly at our forums from industry participants that more needed to be done in this area. Driving change is the new road safety strategy for Western Australia 2020 to 2030. It was released in November this month, and it has an ambitious target set by the state government to reduce road fatalities and severe injuries on WA roads by 50 to 70% by 2030 and to zero by 2050. And the new strategy is a call to action for all West Australians to collaborate and drive change in their communities. And that's exactly what Transafe WA are doing. What Nick Mabbott in his business is doing, and what we're trying to bring together to contribute to that ambitious but achievable new strategy. So Transafe WA shortly will be launching a road a safety truck called Instructor. It's a safety truck resource, an exciting road safety education initiative comprising of a prime mover and a customised trailer mobile classroom. The mobile trailer will feature tangible and highly engaging truck safety education experiences utilising cutting edge technology. It's going to be designed to educate current and future road users how to best safely interact with large trucks and road train combinations in metropolitan and regional areas of WA and the Northern Territory. We're working on a 5-year on-road program for the vehicle, and it will be supported by an expert team, web resources and social media. So if you stay involved with Transafe WA, you'll start to hear a lot more about Instructor over the coming months. And we'd be really pleased to hear from you if your company is interested in partnering with this project. It will take a lot of partners to make it happen and viable for 5 years. But like I said, we've got a great team behind it, and it's a really exciting project to get your name and your brand behind. So keep it in mind and get in touch with Lara or myself if you're interested. So we're going to speak to Nick Mabbott today, or he's going to speak to us. Nick's the Director of Beyond Midnight Consulting. He's an organisational psychologist with over 24 years experience in sleep and fatigue management. Nick's provided fatigue management training and education to thousands of personnel, from office workers to health, construction, transport, gas and mining sectors. And he has been a regular contributor at Transafe WA forums, where his presentations are always well received. Today, Nick's going to talk to us about how our sleep, each of us, impacts driving safety. And it's a personal belief of Dr. Nick that if all of us slept better, the road toll would reduce greatly, not just through reducing those microsleeps, but by being able to focus more attention on road hazards and driving risks. So I'm about to hand over to Nick. I'll let you know that we will certainly have time for question and answer at the end of the webinar. So you can either at that stage unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type it into the chat box, which is there on the Zoom function, and I'll happily read those out for you, and we can engage with Nick at the end of the webinar. So thanks everybody, and now I shall hand over to Dr. Nick. Welcome. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just load this up. So I will say that I may not be as fluent with this one as I normally am with my presentations, because I just got hold of some new research recently that has supported a lot of the things that I was thinking of way back in the year 2000 about how we can actually get sleepy at the wheel and then come good for a little while and then get tired again. But yes, you'll just have to remember that you can get a copy of this later on. So if I go a little bit fast and you miss a few things, just watch it afterwards and catch up on everything. So apart from the truck that's standing on its tail there, I've actually taken these couple of photos of incidents that have occurred on real roadways, and they're of no surprise to me at all. I see it all too often, and it's not just this that I'd like to see us all preventing. It's those silly little incidents that occur all over the place, and especially down near where I live in Port Kennedy, we have roads here that are T sections onto 100k speed limit roads, and you've only got to misjudge the oncoming traffic by a second or two, and you know those outcomes are often fatal or very serious injury. So kicking into this, back in the 70s we introduced seatbelt legislation, and a bit later on it was drink driving legislation. They had an enormous effect on the number of crashes and the trauma that was received in some of those crashes as well. So that was a really good start to it all. And since then, of course, we've worked on a lot safer vehicles. I remember even back in 2003 and 4, we were looking nationally at providing infrastructure on the roads that can help return errant vehicles, so run-off road vehicles normally, back to the roadway with these wire ropes and traffic barriers and all those sorts of things. So we have done an awful lot to reduce the amount of crashes and, of course, the trauma that goes with it. But a report on the national crash stats for Australia for 10 years up till March this year showed that there was decreases in the number of deaths, which is great, but at the same time, there's been an increase in hospitalisation rates. What that tells me is we are protecting the drivers and occupants of vehicles better, but we are having more accidents. So this is the sort of thing that we need to try and get a handle of if we can. The Australian National Road Safety Action Plan, and I'll be very keen to look at the WA one this afternoon actually, now that it's been released. But the National Road Safety Action Plan 18 to 20 does include fatigue in it, and it does say that the best way to manage fatigue is to sleep well. But of course, they're a little bit hamstrung on trying to legislate or enforce anything to do with sleep. You know, how do you make demands on people that in their own time away from the road, they should sleep? I guess in industry, we've got around this to some degree by saying you have a duty of care to arrive to the workplace in a fit manner to work the whole day. And it would be nice if we could get the same idea in everyone's heads that on the road you have a duty of care to yourself and other road users, and if you're not fit to drive, you shouldn't be on the road. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have going forward. Now, fatigue can be caused by long drives, a lack of breaks during driving, pressure to arrive at certain predetermined times. And I remember my interviews with hundreds of truck drivers in the past, have shown that that was one of the biggest promoters of fatigue in truck drivers, was having to be at certain places at certain times and having to push on through to get there. Of course, driving through late night periods, and we've got a lot of shift workers these days who are doing that, and then through sickness or use of drugs and medication, we have a lot of problems out there. Of course, underpinning all of these causes is the amount of sleep that people often get. And I spoke just a couple of weeks ago about how people are a little bit less than keen to try and get the right amount of sleep. There's a bit of a lack of understanding of that. I won't spend a lot of time on this one. In the training I do, I spend quite a bit of time on this, just helping people to better understand that if we don't sleep the right amount, and that is roughly 1 hour of sleep for every 2 hours awake, then we don't get the homeostatic balance right. And if we carry too much of this sleep debt, and I talk about a chemical that builds up in the brain known as adenosine, a buildup of adenosine causes a sleep drive. And if you don't sleep well enough to reduce the amount of adenosine in your brain, you carry that forward to the next day. That becomes a sleep debt, which can produce a sleep drive while you're attempting to drive a vehicle. So that is a very important component of all this. I do a lot of work with WA Police Major Crash Division, and it's really quite sad work, because every time I get a knock on the door and they say, Dr. Nick, would you have a look at this one? I know that someone has inadvertently fallen asleep at the wheel and killed someone. And in some cases, it's a member of their own family or someone close to them. So it's pretty heartbreaking stuff. My job is to write a report for the courts or for the coroner. And these are some of the research findings that I'll use. This was Australian research that showed that between 17 to 19 hours awake, your performance driving a vehicle is the equivalent of performing at a blood alcohol content of 0.05%. Take that up to 24 hours, and that goes up to equivalent of 0.1%, which is twice the national limit on alcohol that's allowed. 1 6 hour sleep doubles your crash risk. These are pretty strong statistics, these ones. 1 5 hour sleep tripled your crash risk, and hardly anyone ever thinks of this. And look what happens when you get 4 or less, up to 12 times the crash risk. And that's pretty much the equivalent of being quite drunk. But people will do that, and especially night shifters who might get 3 or 4 hours sleep during the day, as we spoke about a couple of weeks ago in the last webinar, and they will still happily get in the car and drive to work. So it's something we've got to try and get a hold of. This research came out of Curtin University just a few years ago, and that was all about truck drivers. And what they found was, if you drive a truck for a living and you haven't had the appropriate fatigue management training, you drive at around about 6 times the crash risk. This also applies to if you drive any vehicle full time. Now, this is where I would like to get a little bit different from what you've normally heard. I don't like to use the term fatigue in driving, simply because fatigue relates to extreme tiredness resulting from mental or physical exertion or illness. It doesn't really tell you much about what is going on for that driver, apart from that extremely tired. So I'd like to break it down a little bit. My preference is tired driving, in need of a sleep or rest, or just feeling weary behind the wheel. Drowsy, this is a different level. Again, this is a feeling of being sleepy and lethargic at the wheel. And you know at that point that it would be easy if you stopped to just go straight to sleep. And then of course you got the most dangerous level, which is sleepy driving. And people think that they might just have the odd microsleep and all the time around it is okay. Well, today we'll talk about how that's really not okay. So road safety campaigns would do better to ensure that the difference between the terms tired, drowsy and sleepy are well understood, And we need to treat them differently because there are different outcomes for different problems here. Just going back to some 2003 North Carolina research, they looked at driver risk factors for sleep-related and fatigue-related motor vehicle crashes, quite a few hundred of these. They found the following to be higher risk of a sleep-related crash. And there's nothing really unusual here. Working multiple jobs, which reduces your time for sleep. Night shift, so you were then driving home after a night shift, which can cause a lot of dramas. Averaging less than 6 hours a night, and we've already seen the statistics on that. Poor overall sleep quality. Sleep quality certainly affects your driving capabilities. You may have 8 hours of sleep, but if it's poor quality, it's probably not worth much more than 4 or 5. Frequently driving between midnight and 6 a.m. So this is driving when your body naturally should be asleep. So it's a no-brainer that the brain will try and get you to go to sleep because it's dark and it's nighttime. Excessive daytime sleepiness, which is mainly brought on from sleep problems. Driving after less than 5 hours sleep, we saw the statistics on that, that's triple your risk. Driving after being awake more than 15 hours. And in my training, I often talk to people about getting the homeostatic balance of sleep right is needing 1 hour of sleep for every 2 hours awake. So a 16-hour day, you should get a sleep drive after about 16 hours. So if you've been awake 15, you're pretty close to that sleep drive occurring normally. But if you've had a sleep debt from the night before, that sleep drive will come in earlier at 14 or 15 hours awake. And that's where you get some of these problems. Use of soporific medications, so mainly sleep medications here. Not only do they help get you to sleep, but they help keep you groggy the next day in some cases. And a lot of people don't understand that. The biggest finding in this research was that the subjects who self-admitted driving while drowsy in the past, which is nearly 100% of all the populations I talk to, was the strongest overall risk factor of having another sleep-related crash. So we need to ask ourselves, why do people keep on doing it? And I think a lot of people are just uneducated on how sleep affects driving behaviour and performance. That's the whole drive for me for doing this webinar. Try and better educate people on what goes on. They haven't yet had a fatigue-related crash, even though they may have fallen asleep once or twice behind the wheel. It's too impaired to judge their own impairment levels. This is a little bit like alcohol intoxication. If you take a couple of standard alcoholic beverages, you probably start feeling a little bit happier and braver, and you are starting to look better and things like that, but you're also not too impaired to put a stop to that behaviour going on. But once you get past, say, half a dozen standard drinks, you are getting too impaired to change your behaviours in many cases, which is why some people go on and get rolling drunk. I think tiredness behind the wheel has the same sort of effect. The more tired we get, the less likely we are to make a judgment call on whether we should keep going or not. Risk homeostasis. There's a feeling these days that you can get away with a bit more than you used to in the past because of safer vehicles, sometimes in some cases slower roads and things like that. And so people tend to drop the ball, I guess, as far as safety is concerned. They take more risks, which is what we call risk homeostasis. If they feel safer, they'll take a few more risks. And that's not a good outcome. And of course, there's a big misperception of how long a microsleep may last. Most people think 1 to 2 seconds, but I've seen it go an awfully lot longer than that. So let's look at these different levels of driving impairment that I've pointed out just now. So most road safety strategies and programs are aimed at having a driver stop and take breaks regularly. Nothing wrong with that. And to think about not trusting your tired self. And you may have seen some of these signs around WA and other places. This is all good, but I think we can do better. We can focus on these different levels of impairment. We might be able to just better understand what consequences or countermeasures to put in place for each different level of tiredness. So the first level, I call that tired driving, just feeling a little lethargic, depleted of motivation, getting a bit stiff in the major neck muscles. You get a little bit itchy or, you know, fidgety or bored in some cases. And if you're driving for a living, very easy to get bored while you're driving, especially if you do the same routes and the same thing day after day. That becomes a major problem for what I see in open cut mines, where people just do the same circuit hour after hour after hour, and it's very boring. The second level I call drowsy. That's where your eyes feel heavy, you look slumped in the seat. You start missing signs on the road like speed limit signs and turn-offs and things like that. You start forgetting parts of the drive, you know, like you arrive home and you go, well, I can't remember the last couple of kilometres. And you start struggling to stay awake. So this is a different level of impairment to just feeling tired. And of course, this one precedes sleepy driving. And this is where you actually have the micro sleep itself. And a lot of people think they might have had one when in fact they've had possibly 2 or 3 in the last 5 minutes. Because you don't know, you're not really there. And that's one of the problems. Of course, at this time, you've got very little vehicular control, if any at all. So if we break these down and just investigate each one of them, tired driving, being in a sedentary position for a while takes a toll on the human body. And in a few weeks' time, on the 10th of December, there's going to be another webinar featuring Kieran and Kingsley, who will talk to you all about the physics of sitting down and driving for a living. You'll find that really interesting. Your circulation slows, there's a reduced blood flow to major muscle groups, your muscles relax. This can cause a compression through structures such as joints and your spine, especially if you're slumping a little bit. A forward tilted head and slumped lumbar region creates muscle tension in your neck, which of course leads to more stress and more fatigue. Your arousal diminishes and your reaction times increase. So I guess the further you drive, the more fatigued you get as far as your physical body is concerned. There will be a gradual decline in attention to detail of driving tasks such as lane tracking, overtaking manoeuvres, judging the oncoming speed of vehicles at intersections. As I said before, if you're at a T intersection and the oncoming traffic is 100 k's an hour, you've got literally seconds to make the right choice. And if you make that wrong, even by half a second, you're in big trouble. So these are the finer parts of this. Very importantly, most people do recognise the early signs of impairment, such as driving tired, but don't stop for a break. And the main reason for this is we've been told to stop when we get tired. And people think tired is sleepy or starting to fall asleep. And so they won't stop because I don't think they're tired enough. And this, I think, is the one thing that nearly all motorists do wrong. And if I could talk to every single one of these drivers that I've done an analysis for the WA Police major crash and taken them back before their crash and said, look, the time to stop is when you get tired and not when you get too tired, you could have avoided a lot of carnage and fatalities, of course. So this is the one thing that I really want to get across to people. Stop as soon as you feel a little bit tired, not when it's too late. So I've got a couple more points on that one too. A good friend of mine named Alex Jerram, he's from Tasmania, the group incident-free driver. He has a strategy called look in the mirror. And this means have a look at your driving behaviours. And if you're involved in any incidents, even if there's not a crash, have a think about your contribution to that incident and see if you can change your driving behaviours to avoid them in the future. because it's very easy to get rear-ended and just say, well, it was their fault. They were following too closely, or they were distracted and they ran into me. And I recall one incident that I was involved in back around 2003, 2004, when the Kwinana Freeway didn't have the grade separated overpasses. They had intersections with traffic lights and the orange flashing lights. And I remember getting the orange flashing lights, so I pulled up, plenty of time to stop, the lights went red. The thing I always do is check the rear view mirror, and what I saw was a semi-trailer in full lock, smoking tyres and everything, which was about to run over the top of my car. And I have my two-year-old daughters in the back, my twins. So I had to put the foot on the gas, run the red light and move left and let him go through. There was no chance of him stopping. So I'm not sure what happened there. But just by having a little bit more, I guess, nous on road safety as I did at that time, it saved my children and me from possibly a triple fatality. And what I've realised also is, you know, looking in the mirror and looking at your own behaviours, that's the sort of thing that you need to change the future of your own driving safety. So the reason I brought that in is because if you start seeing your own little errors on the road, you can ask yourself, am I maybe a little bit tired? Should I be driving? Main countermeasures at level 1 impairment, which is tired driving, take a break, obviously. And road safety education often refers to that every 2 hours. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think we can do better. I think we can do a lot better. This is a major point. This is something that I've been doing for a long time now. If I do the long drives, I will always take a break before I get tired. A great example, just about 3 weeks ago, I was in Queensland. I had a 6-hour drive. According to the map, it was 6 hours, so I allowed about 6.5 to 6.75 hours to get there. And I took breaks about every hour to 70 minutes, thereabouts. And I remember when I arrived at my destination after about 6 hours and 40 minutes, I had so much energy left, I actually went for a walk around the town. And that is a major difference to driving drowsy for, you know, kilometres at 100 k's an hour. So that, I think, if Australians could do that, take a break before they get tired, but of course you've got to factor that into every trip. Everyone's always in a hurry to get somewhere. And of course you don't want to stop because it eats away at a few minutes each time you stop. And I think, well, just allow an extra half an hour for every 5 hours or something, and you'll be absolutely sweet. So take the break before you get tired. I often plan to find things of interest along the way. So if I'm doing a route that I've never driven before, I will look for towns to stop at or places of interest, just so it encourages you to stop a lot more. Pretty soon I'll be putting out my newsletter on driving safely over the holiday period, and that is a lot to do with planning your trips a bit better with your family on board. Also make sure that I regularly move while I'm driving, and again, Kingsley and Kieran will talk about this in their webinar. So whenever it's safe to do so, I roll my ankles, stretch my legs, stretch my back, move your hips forwards and backwards, do a few shoulder rotations and things like that. Of course, other things like winding down the window every now and then is useful because the cars we have these days seal up so well that you rarely get fresh air unless you've got the vents open. So that's something to think about too. Your own carbon dioxide can fill the car, and you need to actually get rid of that sometimes to help you drive safe. So that's your tired driver. Now this might sound a little bit weird, act like a smoker but don't smoke. Whenever I'm in a mining situation and I talk to haul truck drivers who are driving for a 12-hour circuit, and it doesn't matter if you're in a haul truck or a semi-trailer on the open road, it doesn't really matter. If if you act like a smoker but don't smoke, what you'll do is you'll stop every hour or so because you're not allowed to smoke in your truck. And what you'll do is, to not draw attention to yourself, you'll make sure that you park your truck in a safe spot. You'll make sure that you don't waste time having that break and just walking around aimlessly. You'll get out, you'll do what you need to do, you'll do a few stretches and move around a bit, you get back in, and you tend to go for longer without feeling drowsy. So that's basically what I do to talk, in training, to talk to drivers about feeling better about it's okay to take small breaks. What I find is some of those guys will actually produce a bit more by just taking a very quick break every hour or so, because as you start getting more tired, you start making incorrect decisions, your foot comes off the pedal and you start slowing down. So it's actually counterintuitive. You can produce less by driving for a longer period. Some of the signs that I see in miners, haul truck drivers reverse under the shovel for a load of dirt, and then they get called up and the shovel operator says, well, how much more do you want on that? You forgot to drop it off. That's quite a common occurrence. Other people take a load of good quality ore and drop it on the waste dump. If it's iron ore or coal, that's usually $15,000 to $20,000 worth in one hit that you can't recover. The opposite of that is taking a load of waste to the crusher, putting it where the ore is supposed to go, and that takes several hours to clean all that out. So again, it's a drop in productivity. The absolute classic that I've seen in mining was an underground site in Kalgoorlie that had 2 loads of high-grade gold crushed and put out as road base. They stopped the whole mine the following day, and all of the crew went walking that road looking for specks of gold. So you can imagine the cost in productivity for that day, just from a simple incident where someone was just a little bit foggy. And once you move past this tyre driving, get into the drowsy driving. You'll slowly move to that next level without even noticing it. You go from tired to drowsy and no one really knows. It can be exacerbated by not having had adequate sleep over the last night or two. That would be that high level of adenosine in your brain causing a sleep drive. Your brain will look to pay back that sleep debt. And of course, if you're sitting down, you're a target. If you're up walking around, your brain knows it can't put you to sleep. But as soon as you're sitting down, you are a target for a sleep drive. What I see a lot of drivers do is they just start getting this fixed gaze or a stare. They're not cognizant of hazards in the roadway. Another thing that my friend Alex Jerram talks about is looking up the road about 5 seconds worth of travel, so that you can determine what's going on with the vehicles coming toward you. It just gives you a better chance to get out of the way if you need to. I have applied that and I have got out of the way of a few errant vehicles. But of course, if you start getting drowsy, you do not look up the road for other people's bad driving behaviours. You mainly focus on the road and which way the road is going. What I find in a lot of the sleep-related crashes is that when you're drowsy, you'll follow the contours of the road and you'll take the corner, and then of course you move into the sleepy phase and most people run off the road on a straight. So that's quite an interesting finding. This is how I like to see drowsy driving. Oh, this is my scientific term for that. The lights are on but no one's home. So in other words, your eyes are open but you can't determine what's going on because the brain is too impaired to work out as you're going what is actually going on the road in front of you. Speed and headway distance tend to vary. So if you ever look up on the road and you see you're right behind a vehicle with only a metre or so to spare, then you know that you're either a little bit distracted or you're too drowsy to keep a good focus on keeping that right distance between you and the vehicle in front. Simple tasks such as indicating and the correct timing of dipping your lights going over the hills at night time, people just totally forget, and you get flashed with these bright lights coming over the hill. Lane tracking becomes unstable and you start moving all around the place. I deliberately got a cam for my window of my car just to, I've been that amused over the years at the errant driving that I've seen, or the lane tracking in specifically, that I want to record some of this on the cams so that hopefully later on I can educate people on this is what people do when they don't even know it. You don't have the capabilities to log landmarks into memory. That's because you have to be fully awake to log this memory. You're incapable of assessing how impaired you are. You are now too far gone to make the right judgment call. And that, again, that's a follow-on from that mistake of not stopping when you're tired. You then get to the point where you're almost unable to put that stop in place. Of course, the phone goes off when you go on webinar. Excuse that. So this would be, I think, the equivalent of drinking way too many alcoholic beverages. I would say drowsy driving would be the equivalent of around 0.8 to about 0.1 BAC. Not that I've got any scientific measures to equate that, but that's just my feeling of that. Okay, so that's the bar before you go out drinking too much. All right, one of the things I'd like to share with you is a scientific term known as empty field myopia, and this describes how the back part of the brain, known as the occipital lobe, way back here, that starts to get impaired as you're getting drowsy, and it stops you from being able to look down the road that 5 seconds that I was referring to just now. So you can see up in the distance there, there's a little blue truck coming over the hill. Well, it's actually not a little blue truck, it's a big truck. And if you have empty field myopia, you might notice that your field of vision turns out to be a bit more like this. And when you get to that level of impaired driving, you are pretty much done. You're well on your way to going to the next level of impairment, which is sleepy driving. You're well on the way out. So once you get past that driving tired without applying a countermeasure, it's unlikely you'll react at all to drowsy driving. So if you're driving with anyone else in the vehicle, this is, I guess, the importance of having a passenger, especially the front passenger, awake in your vehicle. They can keep an eye on these things if they are awake, and they can look at you. And if you have this fixed gaze, they can say, come on, time to pull up. I'm going to drive because it's getting a bit dangerous. Chance to put a countermeasure in place if you're by yourself may have slipped by quite some time ago. And that's the problem with not putting that countermeasure in place earlier and leaving it till too late. And of course, the more we get away with it, the more we tend to do it. This is that risk homeostasis that I was talking about. We get away with it, so we just have this perception that the risk isn't that bad until you actually have one of these fatigue crashes. So drowsy driving countermeasures, you need to stop driving immediately when safe to do so. And when I say safe to do so, if you're on a freeway at 100 k's an hour and the traffic is moving fast, you probably shouldn't be pulling over in the emergency lanes. You want to get the first exit off the freeway and then find somewhere safe to pull up and do whatever you need to do at that point. If you're with another person, have a chat about swapping drivers, have something to eat and drink, because that can help you. It was funny because last year I remember an afternoon training session, and a guy came in, sat down, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was asleep within 5 minutes. And for the next hour, he just kept on nodding off and nodding off. And for his sake, I took a break early, and I said, right, let's still take a break. And I went straight over to him and I said, are you okay? He says, oh, Man, I'm falling asleep and I'm starving. And I said, have you eaten today? He said, I haven't eaten all day. And as soon as he ate, he was good for the next 3.5 hours. So sometimes a bit of fuel in the body can really help you. If there's an opportunity for a 20-minute nap, timed and in a safe situation, that is very important. Try stretches and movement to remind your brain you're moving. It's not conducive to sleep. And a walk around a place of interest. Get some fresh air and get the body moving. Most importantly, if you feel sluggish or drowsy prior to recommencing the drive, just don't drive. It's really not worth it. Because your next level of driving impairment is the highest level of driving risk. And this is where we need to do better in the road safety campaigns and instructions. You tell people if they're feeling drowsy, stop and take a break. If you're feeling sleepy at all, which is what drowsy feels like, then often a break won't fix it. There was a crash just around a year ago where a guy stopped. He pulled in at a survey and spoke to his mate in another car. He said, look, I am absolutely stuffed. I don't know if I can keep going. And the guy said, here, have a Red Bull, see if that helps. So he drank the Red Bull and got driving. And within 20 minutes, he went off the road, rolled the car several times and killed himself and his wife, unfortunately. Now, if you're going to do something like that, remember that a Red Bull or a coffee or something like that takes at least 20 minutes to get into your bloodstream to even start working. But then there's no guarantee that would work anyway. If you're that tired, you need to have a nap. 15 to 20 minute nap will get you going again for at least a couple of hours. All right, if you don't fix the drowsy driving, you move on to the sleepy driving, which is the worst level of driving risk. One of the symptoms is hallucinating. So before we talk about actually driving and closing your eyes and having microsleeps, I'll tell you a few stories that I picked up along the way. Back in 1998, actually 96 to 98, I interviewed hundreds of truck drivers in WA. Some of them were interstate, some were north, south, and east-west. And I heard a lot of stories about hallucinating. And that's quite an interesting one. And I'll tell you my thoughts on hallucinating while we're driving as we go through. Grain farmers, when it's time to bring in the harvest, they'll often go a couple of days without sleep. And I've heard people driving harvesters saying that they wake up and they've just done a few circles. So they're creating their own crop circles and blaming the aliens for it. So I sometimes worry about those sorts of guys and girls who spend a whole day on the farm, sometimes without sleep. And then some of them will get in a truck and then drive when they clearly shouldn't be driving. So what some of the grain farmers do when they start hallucinating is they start seeing images through the grain and things moving. So that's one of the sorts of hallucinations. The armed forces often have exercises where the guys and girls would do 2 or 3 days without a sleep, and they run through these bushes and they get that tired that they start hallucinating. And they start seeing enemy come towards them when there's no one there. They go through ravines, the walls start coming in on them, closing in. Trees and bushes turn into different objects, and there's a whole lot of weird stuff going on for them. But the truck drivers do tell the best stories, I will say that. One of the first ones I ever heard was there was 2 different people driving north-south, so Perth to Port Hedland, and on a few occasions they had to stop for a train. Now there was a crossing there, but usually when they pulled up and put their truck in park, they look up and find that there actually wasn't a train there, and there never was. So they've actually imagined this train. One guy described a 12-foot cow on the side of the road. Now that's interesting because a couple of years ago we worked out that Australia's tallest steer is 178 centimetres. but that's a long way from 12 foot. They also see pink elephants. So that's another one of those hallucinations. The Nullarbor plane crossing. So that, you know, that's, I think it's about 4 times the size of Belgium, that place. And it can take a couple of days to get across. A lot of truck drivers refer to that as crossing the paddock. And because of that, some of them stop to open the gate or close the gate, which is quite interesting because there is no gates. So these, nothing surprises me anymore. These are just hallucinations. One guy was watching cartoons before his trip, and a few hours later, the road runner was on the road being chased. And then we got 2 guys that have told me they've stopped because a cruise liner was going across the road. And there was one of them was using Duramine at the time, which is an appetite suppressant. It's amphetamine based. And back in the 90s, there was a little bit of use of that to try and get extra time out of your body. Anyway, this guy threw his Duramine out the window when the people on the cruise liner started waving to him. So that's how tired this poor fellow was. His explanation was a bit of a classic. So why do we hallucinate? I think that when we have a sleep debt, there are 2 ways of paying back the sleep debt. The brain can go into stage 1 and 2 sleep and then get straight into deep sleep, or it can skip them and go straight into rapid eye movement sleep, which is where we normally dream. So my take on what we call a hypnagogic hallucination is that we are starting to dream while we are still partially awake. And that's the only explanation that I can find. I've got a bit more from some more recent research that explains this wake-sleep transition zone. But if you're hallucinating and you're still driving, you've gone way too far. So that may be what that guy saw in front of him. Although this is a car carrier and not a cruise liner, but it's the only photo that I have. All right, so this wake-sleep transition zone, there's some Swiss researchers in July this year published an article entitled Microsleep Episodes in the Borderland Between Wakefulness and Sleep. And of course, that really piqued my interest because years ago, back in '98, I was talking about people being able to have little bouts of wakefulness and then moments of falling asleep and having microsleeps. But I didn't have much scientific support for that, so I had to keep that pretty close-lipped. But these guys, what they were looking at doing was developing a better system for scoring sleep to improve the American Academy of Sleep Medicine's current scoring system. Because what they found was that people were having microsleeps quite a while before actually fully falling asleep. So they looked to improve on that. They selected 76 patients with suspected excessive daytime sleepiness. They were admitted for testing at the Bern University Hospital, and they performed 4 maintenance of wakefulness tests. So what you do there is every 2 hours, you'll go into a dimly lit room and sit on a chair, absolutely with nothing to do, for 40 minutes. And your one job is to try and stay awake. So they measured the brainwave activity of these people trying to stay awake, just to see what was going on before they fell into true sleep. Very interesting experiment. Now, just a little aside, a driver doesn't generally just fall asleep. They will go through feeling tired and then they will progress to drowsy. They'll notice the tired, but not necessarily, they might not notice the drowsy. And of course, us road safety specialists often speak of microsleeps, which are typically 1 to 5 seconds of duration. At 100 k's an hour, that's 27.8 meters per second. And if you get to 5 seconds, 139 meters with no control over your vehicle. That is a long way. These Swiss authors found that 2/3 of the people had microsleeps of up to 5 seconds. And I think I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago when I talked to large groups of people and I asked them who's had a microsleep, about 98% of people say, yes, I have. So that is an awful lot of microsleeps on the road. And these are only the ones that they've noticed. And you usually only notice them if you have a rude awakening. If you don't get woken rudely, then you often don't even notice you've had that microsleep. So what does a microsleep look like? Well, here's one I prepared earlier. So that one was close to 9 seconds, and at 100 k's an hour, he traveled more than 1/4 of a kilometre. So not terribly safe. Sorry, I always have trouble moving on from this one. There we go. All right, now if we look at this wake-sleep transition zone, what the Swiss scientists found was there was an instability of fluctuations, say that carefully, between wakefulness and sleepiness, leading to the microsleep episodes, or MSEs that they called, and periods of wakefulness. So that's what I was saying that I saw back in the early 2000s, but there wasn't much support for. So my research in the simulator, so that guy was in that driving simulator research, found that a lot of people were doing that, and some of the microsleeps weren't micro at all. So that gentleman there that you just saw was probably falling into a full sleep, not a microsleep. Something running 9 seconds you would probably classify as full sleep. And if we didn't wake him up, then that probably would have resulted in a fatal crash had he been on the road. So these are the things, I mean, there's not always someone there to wake you up if you do fall asleep. I am a big fan of what's about 4 weeks ago, we had a discussion on seeing eye machines on the Transafe WA webinar. And I'm a big fan of that, either in on-road vehicles or off-road vehicles, because some people just don't know that they're microsleeping. Now, they also found that some of these participants had microsleep episodes with their eyes open. So that was something else that I knew before, but had a little evidence of. So it's that fixed gaze where the mind has actually gone into sleep mode, but the eyes are still open. With the exception of 3 of those patients, actual sleep was preceded by at least 1 microsleep, but more often 2 or more. So that tells you how often you can microsleep before you even fall asleep. Of course, that provides a lot of opportunities to crash. The first microsleep sleep episode was followed by sleep within 4 minutes, so that's full sleep in 50% of the group, and in 80%, most people fell asleep within 10 minutes of their first microsleep. But that's still quite a long period of time and a long period of roadway, especially if you're driving at high speeds. Now, if you looked at the timestamp of the last microsleep we saw, that was 4:24 p.m. This one here is 4:29, and you may recall that I said if you are drowsy or if you've fallen asleep already, then just stopping and taking a break does not fixes it. So this is what happens when you take a break and you get back in and you sit down and you drive. So you can see this wake-sleep transition going on as he's trying to control that vehicle. And he struggles. He wakes himself up. And that particular microsleep, he didn't realise he even had it because he wasn't woken rudely. So he wasn't surprised or shocked or anything like that. And this happens quite a lot. So countermeasures for sleepy drivers, similar to drowsy, you need to stop immediately when safe to do so. Best chance of avoiding further microsleep episodes is to cease driving altogether. That would be my preference for anyone. If it's not possible, if you really feel that you need to keep going, the least action you should take is a 15 to 20 minute controlled nap in a safe place. And I will add, don't go into 30 or 40 minutes of nap because you might wake up in deep sleep and you will feel lethargic and your driving will be impaired. It needs to be 15, 20 minutes. Then you need to at least spend 5 minutes walking around and stretching to make sure that you are in a good place. Don't nap in the front seat. If you nap in the driver's seat, the brain will pair those things up. And basically, the more you nap in the front seat, the more the brain will think it's okay to sleep in this position in the driver's seat. It's not. Get in the back seat. If a sleepy driver can access strong coffee or a power drink prior to having the nap, then by the time you finish the nap, that power drink or coffee will be entering the bloodstream. Not only do you get the benefit of the nap reducing some of that adenosine buildup, but you then get the kick of the caffeine. And that has been shown in research from Professor Jim Horn and Louise Rayner. They're from the University of Loughborough in UK, if anyone wants to look that up. They've done a lot of research on the power drinks and napping, and it's quite useful stuff, I think. So just to start winding this up, I just want to recap some of the symptoms and countermeasures of the 3 different levels of tired or fatigued driving. So wandering thoughts, daydreaming, restless, tired eyes, and so on. That's tired. Take breaks before getting tired, most important. If you feel tired, stop, stretch, eat, drink. Don't resume driving unless you feel good again. Interactions with other people. You can phone the boss or you can phone a friend or just talk to people. Fresh air, cool water, bright light definitely will help. Stretches and body movement. And avoid progressing to drowsy driving. The most important point at this point. This is probably your best opportunity to ensure that you never have a fatigue crash. So if you take nothing away today, take that one away. Stop when you get tired. Once you get past tired and into drowsy, where your eyes want to close, you lose focus, you get forgetful, you miss turnoffs, and all of these other driving symptoms, stop as soon as it's safe. Consider eating and drinking and having a 15-minute nap in a safe spot. Stretches, body movement, and seriously consider whether or not you should continue to drive any further. Finally, with the sleepy driving, where you're doing the hypnagogic jerks, that's this one here, where you do the head bouncing, that's falling into sleep, and you lose part of your muscle strength and your head falls over. Slow eye closures, micro sleeps, stop as soon as it's safe. Get someone else to drive if you can. Interestingly, with almost every crash that I've investigated for WA Police major crash, the passengers have been asleep. But if that driver had have stopped and said, look, you've had a bit of a sleep, can you take over driving? It probably might have been okay. Everyone apart from one driver had other people in the car that could drive, but they chose not to do it. So this is what I'm talking about. If you stop when you're tired, you might actually have the brain power to say, well, look, the best thing to do would be to swap drivers. Once you get drowsy or sleepy, you probably won't do that. Consider eating and drinking, strong coffee, followed by a 15, 20-minute time nap. When you wake, assess whether it's worth driving any further. So give it 5 minutes, walk around, do a few stretches and see whether you feel any better. And of course, what you can do is call someone to come and get you rather than risk yours or other people's lives. So there are choices there, but you've got to make the right call. So just to sum up all of this, if we could do better on roads, well, we could do better on roads, sorry, if we all realise that falling asleep is not the only impairment that arises from sleep restriction. There are a lot of things that happen before you fall asleep. Have a break before you get tired, act like a smoker, but don't smoke. If you're drowsy, don't trust your tired self, stop and act. So that is one of the road safety campaigns I think is useful. Don't trust your tired self, because it's like trusting yourself when you're drunk. It just doesn't work very well. If you're sleepy, manage it or get someone else to drive, but don't you drive. Some people just don't get a second chance. And I know from talking to some of those people, if they could only have another chance to just fix up what was broken, even though they didn't notice it was broken, then everything would have changed. Remember your reasons to drive safe. There's plenty of them at home. I won't leave that one on the screen for too long. It's a little embarrassing, but look at all those grandkids over there. That's a whole lot of fun. Good reasons to come home safe. And that's it from me. Hopefully we've got time for some questions still.
Thanks very much, Nick. I have got one question online we'll kick off with and then open it up to see if there's any more that come through. In your experience dealing with road accidents where lack of sleep has been a factor, what type of vehicles do you find most prevalent that the impaired driver has been operating? Is it trucks, normal vehicles, motorcycles, etc.? And why do you think that is?
I would say less than any others, it's motorcycles, because there are more things to keep you awake. You're in a more upright position and you need control with your legs and your arms and your whole core, basically, to control the vehicle. So that gives you a little bit less chance to exhibit sleepy driving behaviours. But some people, in saying that, some people have got off a bike after a big ride and literally fallen over. So you can still get very tired. As far as trucks and passenger vehicles are concerned, I see more passenger vehicles crash due to sleep problems than I do truck drivers. And if you think carefully, a truck driver is a professional at what they do, which is driving. And look, I have measured the performance of drivers over through different states and through different days and weeks of driving. And I've always been impressed by the majority of truck drivers and their ability to go, no, I don't care, I'm stopping, I don't care if it's late, I'm going to stop and take the break now. Of course, one of their biggest problems is, in a lot of cases, they can't always just stop when they need to. And this is what emphasises, and this is the same for passenger vehicles, if you stop before you get tired, you can plan your stop in a place that suits you. When you get tired, there's no road safety agency in Australia can know exactly where to put that rest stop. It's ridiculous. They just cannot foreplan that. So it's about, you know, planning the stop to suit yourself before you get tired, so you don't have to then rely on a knee-jerk reaction. So yeah, simple answer to the question, I think passenger vehicles more than anything else, because most passenger vehicle drivers are not professionals. They're maybe used to driving half an hour a day or something like that, and then they get in a car and drive 8 or 9 hours and they're all over the place.
Another question has come through, Nick, from Jared, who lives in Busselton, where there's been some horrific accidents just recently. The region's been busier than ever with many people on holidays locally in WA. There are also major roadwork upgrades on the Busselton Highway. Would you have any specific recommendations for driving when the roads are much busier than usual?
Well, I guess when the roads are, it's sort of a two-pronged thing here. When the roads are busier, you have to slow down, but you have to attend very carefully, of course, because you have a greater risk of crashing, but the outcomes are usually less severe because it's lower speed. when the roads are open and you get to do your 100 or 110 k's an hour, of course, there is less risk of crashing because there's less vehicles on the road, but the outcomes are much greater as far as severity is concerned. What I would love to do, and I've been trying to for a couple of years now, get on TV or on the radio and tell everyone my top 10 tips for driving safely over holidays, because what we often do wrong is we plan the holiday, we want to get there as soon as we can, we're up late packing, we don't get much sleep because we're a little bit anxious, we wake up way too early, we get driving, and within an hour the whole family's asleep and we're left to survive all on our own. And of course, if your passengers are asleep, it's more conducive to you falling asleep. So I'll try and get these top 10 tips out. I mean, they are currently on the website, but I need to find a way of getting them out. If anyone wants to get on my newsletter list, I will send it out again this in the next week or so.
Great, thanks, Nick. Is there anyone else online that would like to ask a question?
Yes, hi. It's Michael here from Toll Group. The question from Nick is, do we believe, obviously with the fatigue laws as they are, consecutive days you can work a 17-hour day. Obviously allowing, that will mean that you're having a 7-hour rest, but you're not going to go to sleep during that straight away as soon as you pull up. Do you really think, I mean, and you could quite possibly be having 6 hours or less, which is putting, road trains that are going up the road 130 tonne in the category of the double the chance of crashing. When do you believe, do you think laws will be changed around that to mitigate that risk?
Look, this has been a bone of contention for many years. It's actually it's the application of that code of practice that a lot of people fall very short on. So people say, oh, we can do one day of 17 hours, so let's plan to do something for 17 hours. That's not the intention of that code. That's misuse of it. The reason that someone can go 17 hours is, let's just say they're going from somewhere to Port Hedland, which is, say, maybe 14 hours away, but they have several breakdowns along the way, lose a tyre or two, other things happen, and then they're at, they get 14 hours and they're still a couple of hours out. That would, if they're still okay to drive, then they should be okay to drive for a couple of hours, as long as then they pull over and take that break. I don't like the idea of only having 7 hours between finishing 17 hours and driving again. I think that's too short. I would like at least 10 hours to 12 hours break. And when I advise companies that I do talk to, and they ask for this advice, certainly around that code of practice, is I say, don't plan for that. That is for emergency use only, really, and only if you can follow all of the right conditions. So it's not necessarily a legislated change we need. We need to better understand what the code of practice is and does, and how to apply it correctly. And if we had a bit more education and information on that, I think people would do better.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I mean, I fully understand. I'm actually the compliance manager here, and I just know that with these guys, they'll go along and they get paid per kilometre.
Yep.
And they have to get up there and they get back as soon as they can to get the next trip. And I mean, it's not necessarily forced upon them, but I just know that that's what they can do. To obviously that's within the boundaries of the law, so that's what they push it into.
Yep.
Yeah, I get it. But thanks very much. Cheers.
Yeah. So just one more note on that. Sometimes paying by the kilometre encourages that sort of behaviour. And if you can look at pay structures and find a way of doing it that doesn't promote them getting there and getting back in the shortest possible time, then we might get better outcomes as well.
Yes, there's a few underlying issues there in the industry that I think a lot of people are working on addressing and have been for some years, but hopefully
Yes.
we keep talking about it and pushing those, especially if we're going to get to 0 deaths on our roads by 2050, we need to. There's one more question here, Nick. Do you think that people should continue to use caffeine as a boost when driving, or is this promoting people to stretch their targets on safe driving limits?
Well, yes. Look, I see caffeine. Caffeine should be used as a pleasure drink. It should never be used to support being able to drive further or longer or anything like that. And look, I've seen people. Well, I told you the story about the person who pulled over for a Red Bull and who found that it didn't work. Well, unfortunately, he's not here to tell that story. And I've seen people use it as a crutch at the start of night shift, where they get a couple of cans of Red Bull to start night shift. And if that's what you need to get through, you're doing it all wrong. The best background you can get, or the best support system you can get for driving safely, is to try and get 7 or 8 hours of sleep every night. And if you can't get it, and I've done this myself because, you know, I am generally a great sleeper, but every now and then stuff happens. Like Guns N' Roses concert a couple of years ago, I got 5 hours sleep that night, got on the freeway, and it actually felt like they let all the idiots loose that day, because there was people cutting me off and slowing down in front of me. And I did this look in the mirror thing, and I saw a grumpy old man with no level of mental fitness. And I thought, that's it. I'm just going to pull the pin and go home, which is what I did. Sometimes we need to say, well, it's just not worth it. So, yeah, long answer to a short question.
Great, thanks, Nick. There's lots of thank yous coming in today as well too. We have gone a little bit over time, but it's good to see people have stayed with us. Is there anyone else online with any more questions? No, looks good. Okay, I'll just quickly then wrap up by sharing with you some information about our next webinar, which is called Easing Back Pain in the Transport Industry. Nick referred to Kieran Bell and Kingsley Flatt during his presentation. They are a physiotherapist and, what's the other one's title? Can you remember, Nick? Something anyway. They have
exercise physiologist.
Exercise physiologist is another complicated word I was trying to get out of my brain. Not working. So this webinar is going to be on Thursday, the 10th of December at 10 a.m. So same time as today, and you can register for that on our website at transafewa.com.au if you'd be interested in participating. The webinar will give practical tips on lowering the risk of developing back pain and avoiding the slow development of excess tension that impacts your risk of injury and can affect your sleep quality and overall mood. So it ties in nicely to what Nick's discussed today in terms of looking after ourselves and putting ourselves in the best position to be the safest we can be on the roads. So any other questions about today, please feel free to forward them to myself and my colleague Lara, who's also there online, and our contact details are there. Following today, I'll send through a link thanks to Nick for allowing us to share his presentation, and you can have another look at that or share it with colleagues if you'd like to. So please send through any feedback if you'd like to. Otherwise, thanks very much for your participation today, and thanks, Nick. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Anna.